It's October 2020, and while the world is distracted by lockdowns and pandemic chaos, the European Central Bank quietly starts testing for something that would fundamentally transform how 350 million Europeans use money. They call it the digital euro. On the surface, it looks like a response to cryptocurrencies and economic stagnation, but buried in thousands of pages of technical documentation was something far more sinister. A blueprint for total monetary control that would make George Orwell's 1984 look like a paradise. The euro, used by almost 5% of Earth's population across 20 nations and standing as the world's second largest reserve currency, is set to become the largest central bank digital currency experiment in human history. A money controlled not by markets, not by elected governments, but by 26 unelected bankers sitting in a glass tower in Frankfurt. Never in history will so much financial power be concentrated by so few. But what's happening in Europe isn't an isolated experiment. It's part of a coordinated global push that's been building momentum for over a decade, accelerating dramatically during the pandemic years when populations were distracted and governments claimed emergency powers. The numbers are staggering and growing exponentially. Out of 195 countries on Earth, 137 are now actively exploring CBDCs. That's nearly 72% of all nations. 68 have moved beyond exploration to launch actual pilot programs with real users. 11 countries have already fully rolled out CBDCs to their populations, creating a vast laboratory of monetary experimentation. China leads the pack with terrifying efficiency. They started planning in 2014, when most Western economists were still dismissing cryptocurrencies as a fad. By late 2019, while the world was distracted by early COVID reports from Wuhan, China quietly launched the first pilot programs in major cities like Shenzhen, Suzhou, and Chengdu. The scale of China's digital yuan deployment is breathtaking. By mid-2023, it had processed 945 million transactions worth nearly $250 billion. A year later, and the number of transactions exploded 260% to 7 trillion yuan, almost $1 trillion. Over 200 million wallets have been opened. During the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics, they even forced foreign visitors to download the app and use digital yuan, turning an international sporting event into a beta test for global surveillance money. However, despite hundreds of millions of wallets and trillions in transaction volume, actual balances held in eCNY wallets remain minuscule, just 16.5 billion yuan out of China's total money supply of 287 trillion. That's 0.06%. Why is this? Because people don't voluntarily adopt surveillance money. They only use it when they're forced to. And force is what China is employing. Local governments have begun paying municipal workers in eCNY. State lotteries require digital ID just to claim winnings. Tax rebates, transport fares, shopping vouchers, all this was rerouted through the digital yuan. Most cunningly, they integrated it into WeChat Pay and Alipay, the two banking apps that already dominate China's $17 trillion digital payments market, ensuring citizens had no choice but to adopt it. Every single transaction in China's digital yuan system runs through a central ledger controlled entirely by the People's Bank of China. This isn't like your bank account, where at least there's some pretense of privacy. This is every purchase, every transfer, every economic decision flowing directly through government computers in real time. But to understand why Europe is racing to implement its own CBDC, you need to understand the catastrophic state of the European banking system. A crisis that never ended, but was simply papered over with printed money. The story begins in late 2009 when Greece's newly elected government revealed the previous administration had been cooking the books. The country's actual budget deficit wasn't 3.7% of GDP as reported, but a staggering 15.4%. This revelation sent shockwaves through European bond markets that are still reverberating today. Greek bond yields exploded from 4.5% to over 35% by early 2012. effectively locking the country out of capital markets. But Greece was merely the canary in the coal mine. The real catastrophe was the exposure of European banks to not just Greek debt, but to the debt of all the periphery countries. French banks held 56 billion euros in Greek debt alone. German banks held 34 billion euros. But when you included exposure to Ireland, Portugal, Spain, and Italy, German banks were sitting on over 500 billion euros in potentially worthless sovereign bonds. The entire European banking system was technically insolvent. By mid-2011, the crisis had metastasized into a full-blown panic. Dexia, a Franco-Belgian bank that had somehow passed the European Banking Authority stress test with flying colors just months earlier, collapsed in October 2011, requiring a 90 billion euro bailout. The stress test had assumed sovereign debt was risk-free, an assumption that now seems laughably naive. Spanish banks weren't far behind. Having gorged themselves on real estate loans during Spain's property bubble, institutions like Bankia found themselves with 184 billion euros in toxic real estate assets. The Spanish government's desperate attempt to merge weak cajas, or savings banks, into Bankia only required a bigger zombie that eventually required a 24 billion euro bailout. Italy's situation was even worse. Monte dei Paschi di Siena, the world's oldest bank, founded in 1472, was teetering on the edge of collapse. The bank held 48 billion euros in Italian government bonds on its books, representing 140% of its tangible equity. As Italian bond yields spiked above 7%, MPS was technically insolvent, kept alive by only accounting tricks and regulatory forbearance. Now enter Mario Draghi, the Goldman Sachs alumnus who became ECB president at the height of the crisis. In July 2012, he uttered 3 words that would temporarily save the Eurozone while setting the stage for something far more sinister.
There is another message that I want to tell you today, is that within our mandate, the ECB is ready to do whatever it takes to preserve the euro.
Draghi announced the outright monetary transactions program, essentially promising unlimited purchases of distressed sovereign bonds. The ECB had finally discovered what the Bank of Japan had known for decades: the power of the infinite money printer. But this wasn't a cure. It was morphine for a patient with terminal cancer. The OMT program, followed by successive rounds of quantitative easing totaling over 2.6 trillion euros, did lower sovereign bond yields and ease the immediate banking crisis. However, it created a problem that persists to this day: zombie banks kept alive by central bank liquidity, unable to lend productively, but too big to fail. European banks became addicted to ECB liquidity like heroin addicts to their fix. The long-term refinancing operations saw banks borrow 1 trillion euros at 1% interest, only to turn around and buy sovereign bonds yielding 5% or more. This carry trade looked profitable on paper, but did nothing to address the underlying insolvency of both the banks and the governments whose bonds they held. And the truth is, the 2011 crisis never actually ended. It was simply swept under the rug. As of 2020, European banks were still sitting on 1.4 trillion euros in non-performing loans. Italian banks held 135 billion euros in bad debt. The ECB's negative interest rate policy, designed to spur lending and economic growth, has instead crushed bank profitability to the point where many institutions can barely cover their operating costs. Net interest margins for European banks have collapsed from 2.5% in 2007 to less than 1% today. The carnage in European bank stock prices tells the real story. Deutsche Bank, once Germany's crown jewel and a symbol of Teutonic financial might, has seen its stock price crater 90% from its 2007 peak. Credit Suisse, before its dramatic collapse and emergency takeover by UBS in 2023, was trading at just 0.2 times book value. Essentially, the market was saying the bank was worth more dead than alive. These aren't healthy financial institutions capable of supporting a modern economy. They're financial zombies, stumbling forward from one ECB liquidity injection to the next. It's technically alive, but economically dead. As if the banking crisis wasn't enough, Europe faces a demographic time bomb that makes everything else look manageable by comparison. Birth rates have collapsed below replacement levels across the entire continent. Not a single EU country maintains the 2.1 children per woman needed to sustain its population without immigration. Germany's birth rate sits at 1.54. Italy's is a catastrophic 1.24. Spain barely manages 1.19. These aren't just meaningless numbers. They represent a civilization in demographic collapse. Fewer workers supporting more retirees, shrinking tax bases supporting exploding pension obligations, and declining consumption crushing economic growth. The pension obligations alone are astonishing. European governments will need to issue trillions in new debt over the coming decades just to meet existing commitments. But who will buy this debt? European banks are already stuffed to the gills with 3.7 trillion euros in sovereign bonds. Foreign investors are increasingly wary. The ECB can't print forever without destroying the currency. This is where the digital euro enters the picture, not as innovation, but as a desperate gamble. The European Central Bank hasn't even been subtle about their true intentions. They've literally posted on social media about the urgent need to channel retail savings into capital markets, to develop those markets and to finance EU priorities. It's easy to decode what this actually means. Approximately 10 trillion euros sits in European household savings accounts, mostly earning zero or negative interest. To Brussels bureaucrats, this isn't private wealth belonging to citizens who earned it. It's idle capital that needs to be mobilized for strategic priorities. The new savings and investment union they're proposing would redirect these savings into whatever Brussels deems important. Green energy, defense spending, technology ventures, or unfunded pensions. But you can't reliably steer 10 trillion euros with speeches and incentives. You need control. You need visibility. You need programmability. You need a CBDC. With a digital euro, Brussels doesn't need unanimous approval from 27 member states. They don't need messy parliamentary debates. They don't even need your permission. Every euro would sit on a ledger that they control completely. From that ledger, they can implement negative interest rates to force spending, apply decay functions to prevent saving, redirect funds to approved investments, or simply confiscate money for solidarity during the next crisis. The sad thing is we've seen this playbook before. During the 2013 Cyprus banking crisis, the EU implemented something unprecedented in modern Western democracies: direct confiscation of citizen bank deposits to bail out failed banks. Accounts over 100,000 euros had up to 47.5% of their funds seized. Cyprus was just the proof of concept. It demonstrated that in a crisis, private property rights would be suspended, and citizen savings would be confiscated for the greater good. And the Bank for International Settlements, or the BIS, is on a warpath. It's already released architecture designs for CBDC, and is using these ideas to help advise other central banks. The proposed system works like a hybrid between your current banking app and something more advanced. At its core, there's the central bank running the main infrastructure. Think of it as the master server. Then you have intermediaries, basically banks and certified financial institutions, handling the customer-facing side. And finally, there's you, the end user, with a digital wallet on your phone or device. The system runs on what they call a token-based model, where your digital currency exists as tokens with cryptographic signatures, although it could also work as a traditional account-based system where it just shows your balance. To get started, the paper describes that you need to get into the system. You download a wallet app, probably from your bank. If you're already their customer, great. They know who you are, so no extra paperwork. If not, you'd have to go through the usual KYC process, showing ID and verifying your identity. The process for CBDC distribution works in layers. First, your bank needs to have digital currency to give you. They get it by transferring regular money through the existing interbank system to the central bank, which then credits them with the equivalent in digital currency. When you want to add money, you use your banking app to transfer from your regular account. Behind the scenes, your bank takes digital currency from their reserve and puts it in your wallet. If you're using cash, you'd go to an ATM or bank branch, hand over physical cash, and they credit your wallet. The system validates everything in real time. checking you're not exceeding limits, the funds are available, and all the anti-money laundering checks pass. In practice, this means that the bank would be the intermediary that provides the user interface. However, their own papers admit that the end goal is the downsizing of the banking system. As the bank's core functions, facilitating payments, is slowly eroded, all commercial and investment banks will slowly be absorbed by the central bank, creating one megabank to rule them all. Self-custody has never been more important, and that's why Blockstream created the Jade Plus hardware device. It's the simplest and most secure way to store your Bitcoin, and it sets up within minutes with easy, intuitive design and a step-by-step guidance system. Pair it with the Blockstream Green app on mobile or desktop for a seamless experience, and unlock advanced features as your stack grows, like the air-gapped Jade Link storage or QR code for secure cable-free transactions. For max protection, Jade Plus also supports multi-sig. Don't wait, take control of your Bitcoin today. Get the Blockstream Jade Plus using the link in the description down below, and use code PB10 to enjoy 10% off and to support this channel. And Europe is rapidly accelerating towards this dystopia. The ECB's technical documentation, spanning thousands of pages that almost no one reads, reveals the truly comprehensive nature of the surveillance apparatus being constructed. Every digital euro transaction will be recorded on a distributed ledger controlled by the euro system. But this isn't a blockchain in the cryptocurrency sense. It's a permission system where the ECB has complete visibility and control. Transaction monitoring would operate at multiple levels simultaneously. Real-time pattern analysis would flag suspicious transactions. Historical tracking would build behavioral profiles on every citizen. Their CBDC is very ambitious. They even include clauses on imposing negative interest rates, printing helicopter money at will, and downsizing the banking sector by taking over bankrolls. The need for credit unions, clearinghouses, or regional banks would all but disappear. The system would integrate seamlessly with existing financial intelligence networks, tax authorities, and regulatory agencies across all member states. Your economic life would be an open book to thousands of bureaucrats across dozens of agencies. The ECB claims that the digital euro wouldn't be programmable in ways that restrict consumer choice. This is a carefully crafted lie. The very features that they admit to require programmability. First, they discuss holding limits. They're proposing caps of 3,000 or 4,000 euros per person. Think about that. Why would better money need limits on how much you can hold? Because they need to prevent bank runs while keeping control over larger amounts that might try to escape their system. Second, they mention interest rate variability. They want the ability to apply different interest rates to your digital euros. For this to work, the money has to be programmable. This isn't an accident or flaw in the system. It's the entire point. And they even mention adding zero or negative interest rates. They'll be able to charge you interest for holding your money at will. Third, they discuss offline functionality. They claim that special hardware wallets will let you make peer-to-peer transactions without the internet. They say that this is cash-like. And if you think that this is therefore private, you are mistaken. Those transactions still have to sync with the central ledger eventually. Even your offline transactions will end up in their surveillance database. Fourth, they discuss identity controls. They deny planning purchase restrictions, but the technical architecture tells a different story. It includes identity tracking category codes that could easily be switched on to block certain transactions. You want to buy survival supplies, donate to a protest, subscribe to alternative media? One update and those transactions could be blocked instantly. Lastly, they explicitly explain that the CBDC could be used to provide helicopter money. This sounds like an innocuous monetary planning mechanism used for increasing what they call aggregate demand. In truth, this is nothing more than a planned devaluation tool. They'll be able to print money at will and distribute it instantly to wallets, bypassing even government approval for stimulus checks. Your money will be devalued in an instant, and the money supply could become completely unconstrained, allowed to increase and decrease at will. This could create terrifying levels of inflation. But sadly, this isn't just Europe's agenda. It's being coordinated globally through the Bank for International Settlements. the shadowy central bank of central banks based in Basel, Switzerland. The BIS is on a mission to get every central bank to adopt a CBDC. In 2021, they released a global report on the progress of CBDCs. In this report, they stated, during the course of 2020, work on CBDCs continued apace amid the COVID-19 pandemic. The vast majority of central banks in the survey, 86%, are now exploring the benefits and drawbacks of CBDCs. The goal here is clearly to internationalize the central bank digital currency, to ensure total worldwide control of all financial systems. By their metrics, they are winning this war. More and more banks in the last few years have shifted toward issuing their own money. Interest is growing. Legal frameworks are being built. Programs are moving from proof of concept to actual development and implementation. And every major economy is moving in lockstep. India's e-rupee now has 6 million users across 17 banks, with circulation jumping from just 1 billion to 10 billion rupees in 2 years. South Korea's Project Hangang ran pilots with 100,000 participants and 700,000 merchants this summer. Brazil's Drex involves multiple banks testing tokenization. Australia's Project Acacia explores wholesale CBDCs. And like the Atlantic Council states, an astounding 137 countries and currency unions, representing 98% of global GDP, are exploring a CBDC. In May 2020, that number was only 35. Currently, about 72 countries are in the advanced phase of exploration. The message is clear: there will be no escape. Every major currency will be digitized, programmable, and surveilled. International transactions will be monitored and controlled. Capital controls will be implemented algorithmically. Financial freedom, as we've known it, will cease to exist. Without CBDCs, the European monetary system faces collapse within this decade. With CBDCs, they can implement financial repression on a scale never before imagined. Negative rates to destroy savings, forced investments in government bonds, automatic tax collection, and instant wealth confiscation during a crisis. Cash usage is actually increasing in Germany and Austria as citizens recognize the surveillance implications. Cryptocurrency adoption is surging despite volatility. Gold purchases by these individuals have reached record levels. But resistance requires action now, before the infrastructure is completed and escape routes are closed. Once cash is eliminated, once every transaction flows through central computers, once your ability to buy and sell depends on algorithmic approval, it's too late. Your economic freedom, your ability to save, spend, and transact without permission or surveillance, is being systematically dismantled. The question isn't whether you'll resist, but whether you'll wake up in time to make resistance even possible. Everything is at stake, and time is running out.
Suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar.
As a central bank, we have the ability to create money.
We've had an 8-day losing streak in the Dow.
Inflation is our friend.
It's a tough problem.
The question is, how long will this go on?